But most of the energy is going into the ocean, and we're now beginning to measure that. And we can see that the planet is out of energy balance. The ocean is gaining energy at about the rate that we expected. And what it tells us is that if we want the climate to stabilize at the level, it's already warmed up 0.8 of a degree to close to the maximum level in the Holocene. If we want it to stabilize at that level, we would have to decrease the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere to less than 350 parts per million. And that means that we can't burn all the fossil fuels, because so far we've only burned this purple part of the fossil fuels. We can't burn all of the coal. If we do, we will send the planet back toward the ice-free state with 75-meter-high sea level. We can't say how long it's going to take. That's an argument among glaciologists. I don't agree that it would take millennia for it to happen, because once this starts to go, I think because of the big planetary energy imbalance that would be implied if we did burn all the coal, I think it wouldn't take that long to melt that much ice. There's plenty of energy in this energy imbalance. So the implication is we need to phase out coal emissions over the next few decades. And we had better leave the unconventional fossil fuels like tar sands in the ground. If we did that, then we could get CO2 to peak at something like 400 or 425 ppm, depending upon how much oil and gas there is still to be discovered. But we have to do that phase out of coal emissions and leave the unconventional in the ground. But what's actually happening? The US government signed an agreement with Canada for a pipeline to carry tar sands oil from Alberta to Texas oil refineries. And coal-fired power plants are still being built all around the world. So there's this huge gap between the rhetoric and the reality. The governments say we have a planet in peril, but their policies are inconsistent with doing anything about it. So, my point here was well, this is a more recent photo of my grandchildren, but the point that I want to make is that as long as fossil fuels are the cheapest energy, we will keep burning them. That's as certain as the law of gravity. And so we must put a price, instead of subsidizing fossil fuels, we should put a gradually increasing price on carbon emissions to make, because the fossil fuels don't have to pay to the damage that they do to human health, for example, which is a very large cost that the public bears, nor do they pay for the damage to the environment or to the future that our children and grandchildren, future generations will inherit. So I argue that we need to put a fee on carbon emissions collected at the domestic mine or port of entry. And in order for the public to have the wherewithal to make the changes in their lifestyle to move to a low carbon footprint, we should be giving that money not to the fossil fuel industry or some other lobbyists, but we should give 100% of it to the public on a per capita basis. So the person that does better than average, has less than average carbon footprint, would get more in the green check than they get increased energy prices. But we can't seem to get, although this is a very rational suggestion, and I think there's no other way to deal with the issue. It's very difficult because there are people who make a lot of money from the fossil fuel industry, and they're trying to influence the executive and legislative branches of our governments to not take the required actions. and the things that are even talked about, that they allow governments to even talk about, cap and trade with offsets, those are really designed by big banks and fossil fuel industry. They are ineffectual, and there's no way to make them global, because there's no way that developing countries are going to accept a cap on their economy. So finally now, to bring my grandchildren up to date, now my son has 2 children. Just very recently, his second child was born, Lauren, who was 2.5 days old when I took this photo. And her brother, Jake, is a gentle giant. He's in the top 1% for size for his age. So the charts say that he will be 2 meters tall when he grows up. And he thinks that he can protect his baby sister. But the problem is that if we don't get on make a rapid change during the next several years and get on a different path, that situation is going to be out of his control and out of any young person's control. But now, since I was supposed to be inspirational, let me end with some optimistic comments. I think that China is making the right initial steps by strongly encouraging the development of clean energies. China has become #1 in the production of solar power equipment, wind power, and it's building 24 nuclear power plants. I think these carbon-free energies are essential if they're complemented by a rising price on carbon emissions. Then they will have a chance of taking over for the dirty fossil fuels. I also think that we have having a very difficult time in the West in making any headway with the governments. And I've had the opportunity to go to, I think, 7 different countries where I've either written a letter to the Prime Minister, or I've been able to go talk with top people in the governments. And what I find is that it's very similar, although there are many countries which I thought were much greener. For example, Norway, that may have been the one that I really had hopes for being the greenest, because they are, in many ways, environmentally very sensitive for their practices. But they are developing the tar sands in Canada. And when I tried to make clear that, we can't do that, well, the response of the government, were very polite and sent me back a letter and said, oh, that's not the government's business. Even though the government owns Statoil, the company that's developing the tar sands, they said that's a commercial decision, it's not government business. So I think what we have to do in these sort of countries, including the United States, is take advantage of the legal approach. Because in my country, the concept at our very beginning, in our Declaration of Independence from the United Kingdom, the first sentence said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. And that led in our Constitution to the concept of equal protection of the laws. And that concept then was the basis by which minorities gained their civil rights. The court said, gave the government instructions. You need to provide us your plan for how you're going to desegregate schools, for example. I think we should ask the courts, we should sue the government to do its job for young people, because young people are also people, and they should get equal protection of the laws. That means that the government should have a plan for how, consistent with the science, how it will phase out its emissions on a pathway that will allow climate to be stabilized. And I think that's my optimistic approach for some recalcitrant countries. And I think, I think that, again, let me just say, though, that underlying any actions, how is the government going to actually reduce emissions? Well, it's going to have to put a price on carbon emissions, or we will just keep burning the fossil fuels. And if we do that, we will address a lot of very fundamental things, including the issue of these moral injustices, both the intergenerational one and the fact that we're also causing problems for undeveloped countries that have not done anything to cause the climate change. And so I think I'll stop. I see my time is up. Thanks.